Hi there. In this video, we will introduce the economic analysis, and in this process, we will go through various jargons and terms that are usually used and applied in our process of economic analysis. So let's get started. We basically would like to build our dictionary regarding the economic terms and jargons. So primarily, if we refer to the economic theory, it is basically related to the hypotheses that we develop in our economic thinking, and then we can subject them to empirical testing and see if they can become some sort of law or not. But when we talk about economic analysis, we are focused upon the interaction of various variables and the mechanism that govern that process of their relationship, and we try to do the hair splitting in this process, break down various economic variables and their relationships and try to make sense of them. So it is more on the side of the logic. And in this process, we will resort to quantitative tools and graphical tools as well. So there is a slight difference, to say the least, between the two things. We are focused upon the economic analysis side of the things. And economic reasoning and analysis is something very much intertwined. We use a few steps in this, and these steps are basically some features. These features include the ability to apply, because when we are doing economic analysis, it should be done in such a way that we are able to apply those tools and techniques to an economic situation. So this is the prerequisite. Then what are the tools that we usually apply in our economic analysis? They include the quantitative tools. They can be tools like calculus, regression. So we can use tools from mathematics as well as from statistics or econometrics. And in this digital era, we can resort to various softwares in order to be certain and quick in our calculations and estimations. We can also make graphs to make sense of the various economic phenomenon, and that we can do in this process of economic analysis. And whenever we are doing economic analysis, the gut reaction can play a critical role, because we are talking about the analysis of a social science. And in social science, we know that we are dealing with social animal, and the social animal's gut reaction can tell us quite a bit about the interaction of various economic variables involved in our analysis. Now we come to the term economic. This is basically driven from a Greek word which is oikos nomos. So this is the etymology of it, because it has two parts. One is the oikos and the other is nomos. Oikos stands for house and nomos stands for distribution. So the distribution within a house is the term which represents oikos nomos. So household management is the other phrase that we can use for this term. So when we talk about household management, it is not limited to just a household. It can be extended to any higher level, like a firm, like a province, like a country or a region, or even at global level, because management of the resources is done at all levels. This can also be downgraded to an individual's level, because an individual also has some resources to manage. So the resource management or the allocation of resources is in the very foundation of our economic study. And when we do the analysis, definitely we are doing the hair splitting, because we know that analysis means to hair split on something, that is to divide something into its parts and see that what are the various components of that certain situation. So economics can be defined in some other words, like it is the allocation of the resources. The resources can be in the form of goods and services. So now we should focus on economic analysis after reminding ourselves or laying the foundation of economics. So economic analysis can use a few things, can resort to some terminologies. First thing that we should remember is that it will involve mathematical models, because mathematically a situation can be compressed into a model which is concise and precise, and it can give us the results in concrete terms. So mathematical models and many times econometric models are used. Mathematical and econometric models, they are quite similar, so we are using one term out of the two, despite the fact that econometric analysis is also done and will be done in this process of economic analysis. When we talk about the economic models, they are also another term that is used in our economic analysis. Basically, it is the simplification of a real life complex situation, because in real life, if we talk about the trade between two countries or trade among more than two countries, it will involve many factors, but here we will focus on a few of the factors and a few of the goods and countries. For example, if we study a model that is the Hampshire-Ohlin model of international trade, it assumes that there are two countries, and it also assumes that there are two goods that are being traded, and there are only two factors of production: two countries, two goods, and two factors of production, for example, labor and capital. But when we look at this simplification of this model, it doesn't reflect the real life, because in real life, we have more than two countries, we have more than two goods that are being traded between one or more or two or more countries, and we also have more than two factors. We can split them into digital capital, human capital, intellectual capital, financial capital, natural capital. Labor can also be segmented into unskilled labor, semi-skilled labor, highly skilled labor, and raw material can become another factor of production. Energy can become a factor of production. Land is definitely one of the factors of production. So you see, there can be more than two factors of production, especially in today's world when there is quite a bit of specialization in the inputs. So this is an economic model which is trying to simplify the situation and try to make the things more understandable. Definitely it can be extended to any level, and we can extend it to any number of countries, any number of goods and services, and any logical number of factors of production. So this is the decorum of conducting the economic analysis, that we come with a simplified situation, which is the economic model, in order to make things more understandable. Now there are two perspectives in economic analysis. One is the positive and the other is the normative. When we talk about positive, it is something which is actually existing at this time. For example, if inflation is rising, it is happening. No matter it is undesirable, but when we look at the positive economic analysis, it is the inflation which is happening, and we have to accept it as it is. So positivity, it's not about the desirability, it is basically the actual situation which is happening at this time. Behind the rising prices, that is the inflation, the fuel prices can be one of the factors. So this is the positive analysis, in which we are admitting that what are the facts. But when we do the normative analysis, we consider that there is inflation, but it should be low, because we are trying to suggest on the basis of what should be there, that is the norms of the society that are more desirable. So this is the couple of perspectives that we have in our economic analysis. Then there is another assumption, and that is that the economic agents, they are rational, because they try to maximize their benefits, they are self-interested, and it is also logical, because we as human beings, we try to get as much of the benefit as we can, and we try to avoid the costs as much as possible. That is, we try to maximize the benefits and we try to minimize the costs. And we can try to do both of them at the same time, or we can try to do either of them at one point in time. Then we have the optimization paradigm, which is a suitable word to explain this situation, because optimization is from optimum, and optimum means something which is most suitable, and it is most suitable to maximize the positivity or the favorable situation, the benefits, and it is most optimum to mitigate or minimize the costs or the undesirable variable or undesirable situation. Then we also talk about opportunity cost in our economic analysis, which is basically the best foregone alternative. Because whenever we do something, we have to pay something. That is, if we are watching this video right now, we are using our time in this activity and we are unable to do some other activity. And that some other activity that we value is the opportunity cost of watching this video. So best foregone alternative is the opportunity cost. So why we consider this in economic analysis? Because the economists, they look at the things in a very miserly way. They are considering not just what we are doing, but we are also considering that we could have already done during the same time. So looking at the things in such a meticulous way and in such a miserly way makes one things like an economist. So this is a feature in our economic analysis. And we can try to monetize the opportunity cost as well. That is, we can transform it in some sort of currency, dollar or any other currency. For example, if 1 hour is consumed in some activity, we can say that if we calculate the hourly wage of an individual, 1 hour wage will be the opportunity cost in monetary terms of that individual. We can translate it into any number of hours by multiplying the hourly wage with the number of hours that become the opportunity cost of some activity. And in our economic analysis, we also talk about WTP and WTA. WTP is basically the willingness to pay of an individual for a certain good or service, and that reflects that how we value a certain good or service. The higher the willingness to pay, the more is our desire to achieve that good, the more we are willing to have that good. And the willingness to accept is the other side of the things. That is, the producer has a certain willingness to pay for a certain amount that we pay to buy that thing from that individual. So when one sells, he has the willingness to accept for that good, and that willingness to accept is reflecting the value that a seller assigns to a certain good that he is selling. So these are the two forces that are reflected in their demand and supply. We will understand in the next lecture, and their balancing basically gives us a desirable point where both the buyer and the seller, they will be in a balance. We'll come to that point as well as we go ahead. Another term which is very commonly used is the Ceteris paribus term, and in the Ceteris paribus we assume that the other variables or factors, they are remaining the same. This is not just a convention, this is basically a need, because when we study the effect of one variable on another, other variables can also affect the dependent variable. And if all of them affect the dependent variable, we will be in a difficulty to make a diagram that involves more than two variables, because in our two-dimensional diagrams we have the capacity of making two variables as the related variables. So therefore it becomes difficult to handle them, and it also becomes quite difficult to interpret and single out the effect of one variable on the other, and the other variables, they need to become silent or they need to remain constant so that we could focus the effect of one variable on another. We have an example that we can borrow from economic theory, and that relates to the quantity demanded of a certain commodity. That can be reflected with QD. It can depend upon its own price, that we can use P to show the price of that commodity. It can also depend upon the income of the consumer. The higher the income, the more will be the quantity demanded. The higher the price, lower will be the quantity demanded. And the price of the related good, that is a complement good or a substitute good, can also affect the quantity demanded of a certain good. So these are a few factors. There can be other factors as well. For example, the weather can decide about the quantity demanded of a certain type of clothing. The location can determine uh, the taste of an individual, it can determine, and there can be other factors as well that determine the quantity demanded of a certain variable. But if we include all of these variables and we try to incorporate them all together in one diagram specifically, it will become perhaps impossible to have a diagram which is having more than 2 or 3 dimensions. In a functional form, still we can make them, because mathematical model has this liberty of or flexibility of including more than one variables. So here we are trying to resort to a mathematical model instead of coming up with a graph. And it's a mathematical model because it doesn't involve any error term in it. It is a mathematical model as it has all the variables in a measured way, and there is no error term. We'll come to the error term as we go ahead, but right now it's a mathematical model, and we can say that we are assuming that constant values of taste, they exist. Basically, we are assuming that taste is not affecting the quantity demanded, though it's not a very ideal assumption to make, but for the sake of ease we are doing this. Why? Because we have to limit our analysis and make it more understandable. And if we all focus on the taste, they can change even within the same person, they can change over time. So taste is definitely not a constant value, but for the sake of understanding and ease, we are assuming that it is a constant value. Otherwise, it can be included here as another independent variable. So how we can analyze this situation in which these variables are involved? We can resort to the data collection methods. There are more than one data collection methods, and once we use either of those suitable data collection methods, we can do the empirical analysis, and that can be an econometric analysis because we are dealing with economic variables and we are trying to measure their relationship. So metrics will be done, that is the process of measurement. Empirical it will be because in empirical analysis we use the real life data instead of hypothetical data. So we can do some interviews or questionnaires can be run in order to collect the data of these variables and in order to analyze these variables and find out their relationships. Now this will permit the firm to determine how the QD would change as there will be changes in these variables. And once we are able to develop this relationship, this is going to help us to forecast the quantity demanded in the future. So this is the benefit or utility of having this function. We will learn how we can make this function as we go ahead in upcoming lectures. Now this is the very important concept in our economic analysis. This is known as the marginal approach. There is another approach which is the totalistic approach, but we focus on the marginalistic approach, which is quite meticulous and relatively better than the totalistic approach. Basically what we do is that we do the assessment on marginal basis, that is we divide the decisions, the variables and their values in the smaller parts or pieces, and that basically allows us to make the decisions in a more effective and meticulous way, and that is that we can better understand and do the optimization, because we want to maximize the favorable variable and minimize the unfavorable variable, and for that we need to divide it into smaller parts, the values and the variables, so that every step is meticulous and justified. For example, the costs and the benefits, they will be assessed on the basis of single additional product. Single additional product, it means that every product has to be justified for its benefits and for its cost. Instead of making a bulk of products and then analyzing, we will take every step and we will assess every unit of the production on the basis of its benefits and its cost. So we will be able to say yes or no to the production of further goods and products that we make. And in that, mathematically speaking, the change in x will lead to change in y, and we have to keep an eye on the change in y, because when we introduce 1 unit of x, what will be the change in y? Is it a desirable change or a positive change for a favorable variable? That will decide that if we should go for that process of production or any other process or not. So in this way, these are a few terms that we will be using in our process of economic analysis, and collectively they make sense of how the economic reasoning is conducted, how economic analysis can be done. And this was a little bit of introduction to economic analysis, and in that process we learnt about a few economic jargons. Thank you.